I still remember the first time I met him, standing in the narrow hallway of a community center that smelled faintly of old books and disinfectant. I was holding my daughter's small hand, her fingers sticky from a cheap candy I had bought to keep her quiet. I wore my plainest clothes that day, faded jeans, a simple sweater, no makeup except a touch to hide how tired I really was. I had practiced my posture in the mirror that morning, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes lowered just enough to look unsure. I needed him to see exactly what I wanted him to see. A poor, naive single mother struggling to survive. He smiled when he saw me, that confident, practiced smile men use when they think they are the one in control. He introduced himself, his voice warm and smooth, and I watched his eyes flick briefly to my shoes, my bag, my daughter. In that quick glance, I knew he had already decided who I was. Someone small, someone grateful, someone who would depend on him. That was the first mistake he made. We started talking after that, slowly at first. He liked to tell stories about his work, his investments, his plans for the future. I listened carefully, nodding at the right moments, asking questions that made him feel intelligent and important. When he asked about me, I kept my answers simple. I worked part-time. Money was tight. My daughter's father was long gone. I said it all with a soft voice and a faint smile, as if I had accepted this life without complaint. In reality, every word was measured. I had learned long ago that people show their true nature when they believe they have power over you. And I needed to know who he really was before I trusted him with anything, especially my child. He began offering help sooner than I expected. First it was small things. Paying for dinner, buying my daughter a book she liked, offering to fix a broken cabinet in my apartment. Each time, I hesitated just enough before accepting, thanking him as if it meant the world to me. I watched how he reacted to my gratitude. I watched how his chest puffed out, how his tone changed when he spoke to me afterward. He liked being needed. Months passed, and our relationship deepened. He talked about marriage early, about building a family, about how he wanted to take care of us. Those words might have sounded romantic to someone else, but to me they were data points. I noticed how often he used the word I when talking about our future. I noticed how his generosity always came with an unspoken expectation. I let him believe I didn't notice. When he proposed, it was in a small restaurant, nothing extravagant. He slid the ring across the table and said he wanted to give me and my daughter a better life. My eyes filled with tears right on cue. I said yes with a shaky voice, as if I couldn't believe my luck. That night, after my daughter was asleep, I sat alone in the dark and allowed myself a moment of honesty. This wasn't about love, not yet. This was about protection. About making sure I never put my child in danger again. About understanding the man who wanted to be part of our lives. And the only way to do that was to let him think he had all the power. As the wedding plans began, so did the changes. Subtle at first. He started asking more questions about my finances, my past, my decisions. He offered advice I hadn't asked for, framed as concern. When I didn't immediately follow it, his smile tightened just a little. I apologized. I always apologized. He insisted on handling most of the wedding expenses. I let him. I acted embarrassed, saying I wished I could contribute more. He assured me it was fine, that he liked being the provider. I could see how much he enjoyed that role, how it fed something deep inside him. But there were moments, small cracks, when the mask slipped. Once, when I disagreed with him about where my daughter should go to school, his voice hardened. He quickly corrected himself, laughing it off, but I saw it. The flash of irritation. The need to be obeyed. Another time, he made a joke in front of friends about how lucky I was to have him, how I would have been lost without his support. Everyone laughed. I smiled too, even as something cold settled in my chest. He didn't see a partner. He saw a project. I began testing him, carefully. I would pretend to misunderstand simple financial concepts, watching how patiently, or impatiently, he explained them. I would ask for advice and then follow it imperfectly, just to see his reaction. Each test confirmed what I suspected. He needed to feel superior. He needed to feel in control. And that made him predictable. Behind the scenes, my life looked very different from the one he thought he was marrying into. The small apartment he visited was only one of the properties I owned. The modest income I talked about was just one stream among several. Years ago, after my daughter's father left, I had rebuilt myself quietly, strategically. I learned. I invested. I failed and tried again. And I never told anyone how far I had come. Especially not a man who enjoyed feeling powerful. I had seen too many women lose everything by trusting too quickly, by believing love meant surrender. I refused to be one of them. The final confirmation came a few weeks before the wedding. We were discussing the prenuptial agreement he wanted. He framed it as protection for both of us, but the document he presented was heavily skewed in his favor. When I hesitated, he sighed, clearly annoyed. "You don't have much to lose anyway," he said casually. "This is just a formality." I looked down, embarrassed, exactly as he expected. I apologized for questioning him. I told him I trusted him completely. Inside, I felt calm. That sentence told me everything I needed to know. I signed the agreement without argument. He looked relieved, even proud, as if he had passed some kind of test. He had no idea that my lawyers, yes, lawyers, had already reviewed every word. He had no idea that the agreement protected me far more than he realized, thanks to assets he didn't know existed. The wedding day arrived, and I played my role perfectly. Nervous smile, grateful tears, quiet humility. His family welcomed me warmly, though I noticed the looks they exchanged, the subtle way they assessed my clothes, my background, my daughter. Let them think what they want, I told myself. After the wedding, we moved into his house. I adjusted easily, cooking meals, keeping the space warm and welcoming. I let him make decisions about renovations, finances, schedules. Every now and then, he would remind me how much he was doing for us, how lucky I was. I always agreed, but slowly, inevitably, his behavior worsened. The small comments became sharper. The advice turned into instructions. If I pushed back even slightly, he accused me of being ungrateful. He began criticizing my parenting, my spending, my choices. He never raised his hand. He didn't need to. Control doesn't always look like violence. Sometimes it looks like confidence, wrapped in concern. Through it all, I observed. I documented. I saved messages. I noted dates and patterns. I built a quiet file in my mind and on my hard drive. I taught my daughter, gently, how to speak up, how to tell me everything, how to trust her instincts. I waited. The day he finally crossed the line, it wasn't dramatic. It was a simple argument about money, about a purchase I made without asking him first. His face changed. His voice dropped. He told me, very calmly, that everything we had was because of him and that I should remember my place. I looked at him, eyes wide, and nodded. "I'm sorry," I whispered. He believed he had won. That night, after he fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. I reviewed everything one last time. The documents, the accounts, the plans I had been quietly preparing since the day we met. I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't angry either. I was ready, because the poor, naive mother he thought he had chosen was never real. And the man who believed he held all the power had no idea what was about to turn his life upside down. I began changing things so slowly that he didn't notice at first. That was the advantage of the role I had chosen. A woman who is assumed to be naive is rarely watched closely. A woman believed to be dependent is rarely questioned. I started with small boundaries. I suggested my daughter spend more time with her grandparents on weekends. I framed it as giving him and me more time together. He liked that idea. He liked the feeling of being prioritized. What he didn't realize was that I was creating space, space for safety, space for preparation. I adjusted my routines, too. I stopped asking his permission for every little thing, but I did it gently. If he questioned me, I apologized and said I was trying to be more confident because of him. That always worked. His ego softened his suspicion. Behind his back, my real life was accelerating. I reactivated accounts he didn't know existed, routed through structures I had built years ago. I reconnected with advisors who had helped me before, professionals who understood discretion. I never mentioned names at home. I never took calls when he was around. I played the part of a woman learning slowly, clumsily, how to manage a household, not someone preparing for a calculated exit. He, meanwhile, was growing more comfortable. Too comfortable. He began talking openly about our money, though it was clear he meant his. He started criticizing my friends, questioning why I needed them. When I defended them lightly, he accused me of being defensive. When I went quiet, he seemed satisfied. One evening, over dinner, he laughed and said something that stayed with me. "You know," he said casually, "when I met you, I thought I was rescuing you. Now I see I was right." I smiled and lowered my eyes, my fork trembling just enough to sell the act. Inside, something clicked into place. Rescue, to him, meant ownership. From that moment on, I stopped wondering if I was overthinking things. I stopped giving him the benefit of the doubt. I had my answer, and clarity is a powerful thing. The real turning point came with my daughter. She was quiet one night, unusually so. When I asked her what was wrong, she hesitated, looking toward the hallway as if worried someone might hear. That alone told me everything. I sat with her on the bed, held her hands, and promised her she could tell me anything. She told me he had corrected her sharply earlier that day. Not yelled, not threatened, just enough to scare her. Just enough to make her feel small. Something in me hardened then, not into rage, but into resolve. I reassured her, told her she was safe, told her she had done nothing wrong. After she fell asleep, I sat in the dark and let myself feel the full weight of what I had been managing so carefully. This was no longer just about me. Any doubt I had disappeared. From that night on, I stopped playing defense. I began documenting more aggressively. I saved emails. I recorded conversations where it was legal to do so. I wrote down his comments word for word as soon as he left the room. I spoke to my lawyer in hypotheticals, framing scenarios without names. The answers I received confirmed what I already knew. If I moved at the right moment, with the right evidence, the balance of power would flip. Completely. Meanwhile, he started pushing harder. He questioned my spending, demanded access to accounts I kept separate. I gave him partial access, carefully curated, just enough to satisfy his curiosity. When he suggested I quit the small consulting work I claimed to do so I could focus more on our family, I hesitated just long enough to seem conflicted. Eventually, I agreed. That decision pleased him more than anything else had in months. He felt secure again, convinced he had tightened the last loose thread. He didn't realize I had already shifted my real work elsewhere, into spaces he couldn't see or touch. The irony was almost painful. The man who believed he was controlling everything was, in fact, moving exactly where I needed him to be. The day I chose to end it was quiet. No argument, no dramatic scene. He left for work in the morning, kissed my cheek distractedly, reminded me to handle a few errands. I smiled, nodded, and watched him drive away. Then I acted. Within hours, my lawyer filed the necessary paperwork. Protective measures went into place immediately. Accounts froze where they needed to. Access was restricted. My daughter was already with her grandparents, safe and unaware of the storm about to break. When he came home that evening, the locks had been changed. I watched through the security feed as he stood there, confused at first, then angry. He called my phone again and again. I didn't answer. I let my lawyer handle the first contact, delivering the message calmly, professionally, with no room for negotiation. He didn't take it well. The messages that followed were a mixture of disbelief and fury. Accusations flew. Threats followed. Then pleading. He demanded to know how I could do this to him, after everything he had done for me. I read every message. I saved every one. In the days that followed, his carefully constructed world began to unravel. He discovered that certain assets he believed were solely his were not as untouchable as he thought. He learned that the prenuptial agreement he had been so proud of did not protect him in the way he assumed. He learned that the woman he thought he had rescued had been far more prepared than he ever imagined. The look on his face in court was something I will never forget. He didn't laugh this time. He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time, truly seeing me, and realizing too late that the version of me he had underestimated was the only real one. His confidence crumbled as the proceedings unfolded. Each piece of evidence landed quietly, efficiently. There was no need for dramatics. Truth, when properly documented, speaks for itself. He tried to paint me as manipulative, deceitful. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. I sat there calmly, answering questions clearly, without emotion. I didn't need to perform anymore. The role of the poor, naive mother had served its purpose. Now, I was simply a woman protecting herself and her child. When the initial rulings came down, his shock was almost tangible. He lost access. He lost leverage. He lost the narrative he had relied on so heavily. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, drawn by the sudden shift in fortune. He avoided them, head down, while I walked past quietly, my lawyer at my side. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Back home, my home, I sat with my daughter and told her everything was going to be okay. And for the first time in a long while, I knew it was true. But this wasn't the end. Not yet. Because while he was busy reacting, scrambling to understand how everything had gone so wrong, I was already thinking 3 steps ahead. I had never wanted revenge for its own sake. I wanted safety, stability, control over my own life. What happened next was simply the result of a man finally meeting the consequences of believing power belonged only to him. And he still had no idea just how much he was about to lose. He thought the worst was over after the first court rulings. I could see it in the way his messages changed tone, less rage, more calculation. He still believed there was room to maneuver, some angle he hadn't tried yet, some weakness in me he could exploit. Men like him always believed that. What he didn't understand was that I had never depended on his reactions. I depended on preparation. The weeks that followed were quiet on the surface and brutal underneath. His legal team tried to renegotiate, to pressure, to intimidate. They hinted at dragging things out, at exhausting me emotionally and financially. I let them talk. My lawyer listened, nodded, and then calmly presented documentation that shut each argument down before it could take root. Every attempt he made only revealed another lie, another inconsistency, another crack in the image he had worked so hard to build. Meanwhile, his true nature began to show to people who had once admired him. Former colleagues started distancing themselves. Friends stopped returning his calls. The same confidence that once made him charming now made him reckless. He talked too much. He complained to the wrong people. He underestimated how quickly sympathy evaporates when control and entitlement are exposed. I stayed silent. Silence, I learned, is unsettling to those who rely on dominance. He wanted me angry. He wanted me desperate. He wanted proof that he still mattered to me. He got none of it. Instead, he watched as I moved forward steadily, methodically. I finalized the purchase of a home in my name alone, a place filled with light and space and peace. I restructured my work openly now, no longer hiding or minimizing. When people asked questions, I answered simply, without drama. He saw the headlines eventually. Not sensational, just factual. A business deal here, a professional recognition there, enough to make it impossible for him to cling to the fantasy that I had been nothing without him. The hardest moment for him came during a private mediation session he insisted on. He wanted to speak to me directly, convinced that if he could just get me alone, he could regain control. Against my better judgment, and with my lawyer present, I agreed. He looked smaller across the table. Tired, frustrated, angry in a way that had nowhere to go. I don't understand, he said finally, his voice low. Why would you do this? I gave you everything. I met his eyes calmly. No, I said. You gave me permission to survive. I gave myself everything else. He scoffed weakly. You planned this. You tricked me. I didn't deny it. I didn't confirm it either. I simply said, I protected myself. And my child. For a moment, something like fear flickered across his face. Not fear of me, but fear of irrelevance. Fear of being seen clearly. That woman you married, I continued, my voice steady, she was real. She was cautious. She was careful. She just wasn't powerless. The session ended shortly after that. There was nothing left to say. From that point on, the legal process moved quickly. Once the illusion of his control was gone, everything else followed naturally. Assets were divided according to reality, not assumption. Boundaries were enforced. Contact was limited. My daughter flourished in the absence of tension, her laughter returning in small, beautiful bursts that reminded me why every calculated step had been worth it. As for him, the consequences stacked quietly but relentlessly. Opportunities dried up. His reputation, once polished, became complicated. People didn't accuse him openly, they simply chose not to work with him. That kind of loss is harder to fight. There's no courtroom for it, no appeal. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he told a different version of our story wherever he went. In his telling, I was manipulative, deceptive, ungrateful. I let him have that. Anyone who believed it wasn't someone I needed in my life. The truth didn't need defending. Months later, I received a message I never expected. It wasn't angry. It wasn't demanding. It was an apology. Short, awkward, clearly written after many drafts. He said he had underestimated me. He said he was sorry for the way he treated me and my daughter. He said he finally understood what he had lost. I read it once. Then I closed my phone and went back to making dinner. Forgiveness doesn't always require a response. One evening, as I tucked my daughter into bed, she asked me a question that caught me off guard. Mom, she said softly, were you scared back then? I considered it honestly. Sometimes, I said, but I was more determined than scared. She nodded, satisfied with that answer, and drifted off to sleep. Later, standing alone in the quiet of our home, I reflected on the strange path that had brought me here. I had acted like a poor, naive mother when I met my fiancé because I needed to know the truth about him. I needed to see how he treated someone he believed was beneath him. And he had shown me. What he never understood was that pretending to be powerless doesn't make you weak. Sometimes it's the strongest position you can take. Sometimes it's the only way to reveal the real balance of power. I didn't destroy him. I simply stepped aside and let his own nature do the work. In the end, the life I built wasn't a victory over him. It was a return to myself. To safety. To control. To quiet strength. And that, more than any act of revenge, was the outcome he never saw coming.